Hello and welcome back to Burning Questions. My name is Mbali, and today, guys, I have an amazing guest, Piet le Roux from Sakeliga. Piet, thank you so much for taking your time to join us on this episode of Burning Questions.
It's a pleasure to join you, Mbali.
Definitely. Before we get into anything, by the way, Piet is the CEO and Director of Sakeliga. Piet, do you mind telling us what your role, what is Sakeliga, and then just give us a bit of what you do and where can people find your work.
So Sakeliga is a business organization. We have about
Mhm.
12,000 members and several chambers affiliated with us across the country. And our purpose is to create a prosperous and conducive environment for business in the interests of
Mhm.
our members and the communities wherever our members do business. So we're a
Mhm.
public benefit organization, and everything we do, we measure against that yardstick.
Okay. What does Sakeliga mean, actually? And what language
Sake,
is it in?
yeah, yeah. So Sakeliga, it's an Afrikaans word. It's
Uh-huh.
combined of two parts. So Sake, the first part means business, Sake,
Business, yeah.
trade,
Mm-hmm.
and the second part, Liga, means league. And
Okay.
we actually got the name from an old European merchant league, and it
Uh-huh.
was called the Hanseatic League. It was one of the largest merchant and trade leagues in the world. It was from about the late 12th century to the
Mm-hmm.
16th, 17th century. It was huge. Like it had hundreds of towns affiliated with it, and so on. It was not the church, it wasn't the state, it was just merchants collaborating,
Yeah.
and we like that idea.
All right, cool. No, that sounds great. All right. Since we've had a bit of a background to who Pete is, can we get into this week's question? So, guys, this week's question reads: how can ordinary people stand up to the government? And Pete, I think I'll just let you answer that as you can.
So governments can do either good things or they can do bad things. If they do
Mm-hmm.
good things and they're acting in accordance with promoting the common good, then there's no reason to stand up to government.
Yes.
But then probably there is a way in which you can participate and improve on that.
Mm-hmm.
But the question, I guess, so mostly focuses on this alternative part, which is what do we do when governments act not in accordance with what promotes the common good, when they do harmful things? And
Mm-hmm.
then I think we can stand up to government in two ways. The first is to reform it. So by participating in it as an institution of society, it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
institutions that, there are churches, there are schools, there are clubs. Governments are one among many institutions of society. They're a little bit different than most because they have claims to sovereignty. They say we have the final say,
Mm-hmm.
and normally only gods say that. But like
Yes.
Thomas Hobbes said, states can try and pretend that they be mortal gods, but so
Mm.
sometimes they say we have the final say. That's the
Yeah.
problem with governments. If they do bad things, they claim to have the final say in it.
Yeah.
And then you still have the option of reforming through the institutions, through the mechanism within that institution, parliament, lobbying, etc. You can reform by improving on laws or preventing the laws of passing and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's all good and well, and sometimes that can deliver really great results. But in South Africa, that's not always the case. And
Yeah.
certainly in democracies, forms of government where there is a very dominant arrangement of ideas, and where that dominance entrenches some of the bad ideas, it's not reform. Maybe you put 20% of your effort into reform, but then what to do with the rest? And this is the good news, because normally people would think, or the typical idea, especially in Western societies, are that the way to stand up to government is to go knock on their door and knock harder and harder and harder until they
Yeah.
change their minds.
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
and but maybe there are other ways of
Mm-hmm.
creating parallel institutions, creating institutions and ways of cooperation next to government or alongside government. There's
Do we
this
have
wonderful
such
book by
institutions? Sorry to jump in. Do we have
yeah,
those
go.
institutions in South Africa?
Oh, I think we do, and we increasingly do. You see, in South
Mm-hmm.
Africa, there's an interesting combination of things that makes it a very, very interesting test case for around the world. So let's say you
Mm-hmm.
go to Europe, you have European Union, you have the local governments in some of those countries, and they tend to be efficient as governments can be. And so
Mm-hmm.
you don't have this massive, obvious state failure as you have in South Africa.
Yeah.
And so there's not an obvious need for society and institutions, voluntary institutions, to provide alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, in some very poor countries, somewhere else in Africa, and some other countries, Sudan or Eritrea, those countries come to mind. Um, you have you have state failure, so there's an obvious need for alternatives, but you don't have
Mm-hmm.
the capital base culturally and financially and in economy-wise for institutions of civil society to actually viably uh, provide alternatives. So in South Africa, you have this state failure on the one hand, and you
Yeah.
have society is getting. So I think examples that comes to mind is Sakeliga. Of course, we try to do this from a business side, but you
Yeah.
have organizations like AfriForum, Solidarity. Those are mostly in the Afrikaner groups. You
Mm-hmm.
have organizations like the IR. You have organizations of, I think, in many towns, you see the communities cooperating and taking over
Yeah.
service delivery where there's a complete
Yes.
failure. So you have a mix from cultural
Oh,
to
and we have
just
fan.
service
Yes,
delivery
we have
based.
fan.
You have all of that. And you have fan, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's precisely.
Yeah, you can go on. Sorry about that.
So yeah, you asked me for some examples. So let me
Mm.
frame these examples just within my general thesis, which is the one hand you can reform by knocking on government's door and exerting some pressure and change within the mechanisms of the institution. But I
Mm-hmm.
think in South Africa we have a really, really great opportunity to create alongside government alternative centers of order, alternative institutions, from private dispute resolution to service
Mm-hmm.
delivery at a local level, to cultural and sports development, to some forms of governance, even, for example, especially at the local level, or
Yeah.
maybe at a trade or merchant level. All these things can happen, and they can happen if you have an internal locus of control to say that, well, I'm going to create something to fulfill a need where state
Mm-hmm.
failure creates a need.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let us get into the quote of the week. Just quickly share it with you, and then you can maybe give us a brief 2 minute thoughts of it. So it comes from Ben Carson and it reads: We've been conditioned to think that only politicians can solve our problems. But at some point, maybe we will wake up and recognize that it was politicians who created our problems. And to add to that point, I honestly think that South Africans should be empowered to be problem solvers in their community, and this code card literally links it to that empower ordinary people to have a say in how to solve problems. So yeah, I think you can maybe share your thoughts on this.
Well, my first thought is that I like it very much. Ben Carson, of course, speaks from an American context, and it might be appropriate to note here that one of the greatest works of sociological observation ever was written by a gentleman called Alexis de Tocqueville.
Hmm.
He was a Frenchman who toured the United States in the 1800s, and he observed on how wherever he went, he found people creating mutual societies, clubs, forms of association to solve problems. I think it's not so customary today still, but some of that spirit does live on in the United States, and certainly is evident in Carson's statement there. So I think that we can apply that. It's perfectly true that you don't need to go through the politics of the state to achieve something. Politics
Hmm.
understood as cooperation for the common good, and coordinating with people to achieve the common good. Politics can also be understood in that broader sense, and certainly in that sense, we can do politics ourselves. We don't need
Hmm.
to go through the
Yes.
state's politics. We can do
Hmm.
practical local politics. I like
Yeah.
Carson's statement.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Pete, I think we have kind of come to the end of our short discussion, and I definitely do think you answered the question properly, and I hope the person who asked the question they got the answer. Pete, where can people find your work?
You can just go to
Mm-hmm.
sakeliga.co.za, sakeliga.co.za, and on our website we publish media statements or articles or analysis from time to time. We also you can also access the litigation we do there, or come and attend one of our events. It's we usually do that at very affordable prices because we want to meet people. So yeah, best way is go to our website or follow us on Twitter, Sakeliga,
Uh-huh.
Facebook, etc. But come to our events. We'd like to meet you.
Definitely. All right. I'll add all of that info in the description box. Thank you so much, Pete, for joining us. And to you at home, remember to catch this show every Wednesday at 6 o'clock on YouTube, Instagram, and on Facebook. And yeah, remember, guys, your freedom is worth fighting for.